What are the key skills in butterfly? Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. It's time to talk about butterfly and butterfly upper body propulsion. Because swimmers are using both arms at the same time, they can create a ton of propulsion, a huge impulse, and that can lead to a big increase in speed. The drawback is because they use both arms at the same time, there's going to be a big gap before they can get the arms back into the water and creating propulsion again. So in order to swim effective butterfly, swimmers have to get a lot out of each arm pull because there's that big space between the arm pulls. So if they don't accelerate the body, they don't create a lot of propulsion, they're really going to slow down because it's going to take a lot of time before they can execute another great pull. For that reason, it's really important to lock in a really effective pull and use the most effective skills possible to create a ton of propulsion. We're going to take a look at just how swimmers can do that, and what it really all comes down to is they have to create a big surface area that they can use to move water with. They have to move that water for as long as possible, and they have to accelerate the water as they move through the pull. If swimmers can accomplish those objectives, they can create a lot of propulsion, and that's going to lead to faster butterfly. Let's check it out. So after she enters, she's setting it up, she's oriented the forearms backwards, and now she's going to apply some propulsion to move herself forward. So that's the first key skill, is setting things up so that there's a surface area that's facing backwards. So if she was just to push straight down here, rather than orienting the forearm backwards, she's going to create a lot less propulsion, but she sets it up so that the forearms are facing backwards, and then she creates a lot of propulsion and then pulls straight back. So again, creating an effective surface area with the arm so that the forearm is oriented backwards is the first key skill that swimmers need to manage. So we'll take a look at another swimmer here, and it's going to be the same thing. So right there, he's orienting the arms, they're facing backwards, and then he's going to rip through and create a lot of propulsion. So first step is setting things up, orienting the arm backwards. You can see that right there, and that's going to create the best opportunity, the best surface area for him to create a lot of propulsion and move a lot of water backwards. So that's the key skill that needs to be executed. Swimmers need to orient those arms backwards early in the stroke. That's going to create a lot of potential to move a lot of water backwards throughout the remainder of the stroke. So we'll take another look with another swimmer here. And as you can see right there, she's setting it up, getting those forearms facing backwards, and then executing a really great pull. And that's going to allow her to create a lot of propulsion. So setting it up, orienting everything backwards, and then creating the pull so that she can move a lot of water when she does pull. If she just kind of pulls right through, it's not going to be very effective. If the forearm's not facing backwards, it's not going to be very effective. So right there, she's setting it up and then ripping it through. So the next key skill is maintaining that position, maintaining that effective surface area for as long as possible. So right about here, she's got things set up. She's facing backwards, and then she's going to pull all the way through the back of the stroke, and you can see that forearm is still oriented backwards as she does so, and that's going to create a big pulse of propulsion. So if she were to set things up right here and then just kind of let go of it, drop the elbow, it's going to be a lot less effective than if she holds that position all the way through the back of the stroke. So sets it up right about here, starts pulling, and then she's going to pull all the way through the back of the stroke, maintaining that forearm position for as long as possible to create as much propulsion as possible. So we'll see the same thing with this athlete. Again, sets it up. He's in position right here, and he's going to pull. Those forearms are facing backwards all the way through the back of the stroke. And you can see from about right here all the way back to the end of it, he's creating a lot of propulsion. He's got those forearms facing backwards. The hands are facing backwards, and that's going to create a big pulse. It's one thing if to get into this position, but he's going to hold that position all the way through the back of the stroke, and that's going to create a huge pulse of propulsion, a lot more than if he maintained that same position for only a short period of time. So it's all the way through, and that's what's going to create a ton of propulsion. One final swimmer here, and you can see big surface area, and then she's going to hold it all the way through. Right here, you can see those forearms are still facing almost entirely backwards, and then through the back of the stroke, and then coming back for more. So setting it up, holding it here, and then holding it all the way through the back of the stroke. It's not just the position that can be achieved, it's how long that position can be achieved, and that's ultimately what really creates a lot of propulsion. Third key skill is accelerating the limb through. So patience, 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 and then you can see the acceleration through the back of the stroke. I'm just going through this frame by frame. You can set up, and then there's the acceleration there. That's going to create a lot more propulsion than if swimmers just maintain the same hand speed all the way through. So acceleration through the back there. There's patience here, and then there's a setup, and then there's a building pressure, a building acceleration throughout the whole stroke. That acceleration maintains pressure on the water. That means more propulsion. Same thing with this swimmer here. Patience, and then acceleration. Patience, and then acceleration. And the challenge for most swimmers is creating the optimal amount of acceleration. If they're too patient, they won't create as much propulsion as they otherwise could. If they're too aggressive, they're going to get ahead of the stroke, and that's going to cause them to lose propulsion too. They're going to lose their timing, they're going to lose their position, and that ultimately will lead to less propulsion. See the same thing with this swimmer. There's the acceleration there, patience in the front, acceleration through the back of the stroke. Patience in the front, acceleration in the back. Again, that allows them to maintain pressure on the water. That allows them to create more propulsion. If they're consistent with the hand speed, even if they execute the right motion, they're not going to get nearly as much propulsion as compared to when they accelerate the limb. Hand acceleration, arm acceleration is a key aspect of creating a lot of propulsion with the upper body. An additional aspect of upper body propulsion that I'd like to draw attention to is how the stroke is powered. So ultimately, swimmers want to use the strong muscles of their chest, the pecs, and the strong muscles of their back, the lats, to create a lot of propulsion. As you can see here, when he sets up the stroke, there's a lot of space in his armpit. It's really open, and the elbow is way out to the side. And then as he pulls, that elbow is going to squeeze into the body, and that's going to be the contraction that powers the pull. And so he's going to open the armpit to set up the stroke right there. The elbows slide out. It creates a lot of space in the armpit. And then the elbows are going to slide into the body, and that motion is going to be powered by the chest and the back, and that's going to create a ton of propulsion. So sets it up, opens the armpit, squeezes through, and closes the armpit. And that allows the strongest muscles of the upper body to power the stroke, which is going to help swimmers create a lot more speed. And because those muscles are so strong, they're going to have a lot more endurance as well. So we'll take a look at the same concept from a different angle. And what we can see is she sets it up. You can see there's a lot of space between the side of her body and her arm. And then as she pulls, that space disappears. She pulls in right there. And that's the action that powers the pull. And that action is powered by the chest and the back. So sets it up. There's a lot of space, and then pulls through and closes that space down. And that's going to create the propulsion that she's looking for. And if you notice, there's going to be some inward motion of the hands there. And what that really is when she pulls back, the elbows come into the side. That's what drives the hand position to move in towards the body too. And so it's not that she's trying to scull. She's still trying to pull directly back. It's because she's closing that armpit, pulling the elbow to the side, that the hands come along for the ride. And so again, she sets it up, and now she's going to pull everything back, squeeze the arms to the body, and that's going to pull her forward through the water. Creating propulsion in butterfly is ultimately simple. Swimmers need to create a big surface area. They need to move that surface area backwards for as long as possible, and they need to do so with accelerating speed. They can power that pull by opening the armpit, getting the strong muscles of the chest and the back lengthened, and then contract those muscles, pulling straight back, letting the elbow come into the side, and that's going to allow for the maintenance of that big surface area, and that's also going to allow for the acceleration of the limb. The kick is critical in butterfly, and it serves multiple roles in creating speed, some of which you may have not considered before. We're going to learn all about the kick in butterfly, what it is, what it does, and what swimmers need to do in order to have a great one. More than anything else, the butterfly kick creates propulsion. While that has the obvious benefit of sending swimmers down the pool, the butterfly kick also creates propulsion that serves to lift the hips after the kick. But it's no less important than moving swimmers down the pool, because indirectly, it makes it a lot easier for swimmers to move down the pool. So let's dive in and explore the butterfly kick. To have an effective butterfly kick, swimmers are going to need to orient the feet backwards to create as much propulsion as possible. So if we watch here, we're going to see the swimmer set up the kick, and right there you can see his feet are starting to point backwards, and they're going to stay backwards until right there where they flick through. So as much as possible, you can see that they're bent backwards. That's going to create as much propulsion as possible, and they're going to get the most out of each kick. So in order to do that, they're going to need to bend the knees to get the foot facing backwards. They're also going to need to flex the ankle in order to get the foot facing backwards as much as possible. So by bending the knee, by bending the ankle back, they're going to create a position where water can be moved backwards as much as possible, and that's going to move swimmers forwards. However, if we watch the actual kick, the foot's not going to be facing perfectly backwards. It's going to be facing backwards and down, and the kick itself is going to be down. So while the kick is going to move the hips forward, it's also going to move them up. So right there, you can see the hips lift in the water as a result of the kick. And when we see here, the kick, the hips are going to go up right there as a result of the kick. So whenever swimmers kick, they're creating propulsion, and that's sending them forward and up with the hips. So when swimmers create propulsion with the legs, they're moving the body forwards and up as they move through the water. In terms of moving a swimmer forward, the kick happens at two key points. One, right here, where the swimmers aren't creating any propulsion with the upper body, and so it helps swimmers get a little bit of speed, help them maintain a little bit of speed prior to setting up the stroke and executing the pull. So a strong kick can allow a little bit more continuity of speed by creating more propulsion when no propulsion is being created by the arms. And the kick also happens at a second key point right before the arm recovery, and obviously during the arm recovery, there's going to be no upper body propulsion, so swimmers need to be moving as fast as possible so they can maintain as much speed as possible when they're not creating any propulsion. So right here, they've got the pulse from the upper body, and then they're adding the kick to it to help them get even more speed as they head into the arm recovery. So from a forward propulsive standpoint, the kick plays a really important role in minimizing the impact of the arm recovery, because it allows swimmers to create more speed heading into the arm recovery, and it allows them to create a little bit of speed after the arm recovery. Now, I've already mentioned how propulsion is directed forwards and upwards. We've discussed the positive impact of the forward propulsion. Let's take a look at the impact of upward propulsion on the stroke. So as the arms are preparing to enter, you can see that the body is at an angle, and that's because the arms have been recovered over the water, and the chest has been lifted in the water to breathe, and that's going to push the hips down. So the body's going to be at an angle. Of course, that's going to create a lot of resistance as swimmers move through the water, so it's a position that swimmers have to get out of. And so as they enter the arms, there's going to be a little bit of a press of the chest, which is going to help establish alignment in the water again. But also, watch that kick there. There the kick comes through, and that's going to pop the hips up. And so the propulsive action of the kick is also really important for reestablishing body alignment after the pull, where swimmers are necessarily going to lose alignment. So the kick serves another really important propulsive function, not because it's moving the swimmer forward through the water, but it's moving the hips up in the water, which is going to create a better alignment, which is going to allow for more speed. It's like taking off the brakes, and the kick serves a really important function for helping swimmers get back into alignment. So watch it again here. The body's inclined, there's a little bit of press of the chest, but boom, the kick happens, and that's going to pop the hips back up to the surface. And you can see the swimmer's in much better alignment here than they were right there. And that's not a flaw with this swimmer's skills. That's going to happen with everyone. The key is to minimize the impact and the duration of those poor body positions, and that kick can help swimmers get back into alignment faster and more effectively. When it comes to the other kick, we have the same basic dynamics. The swimmer is beginning to lift the head, lift the chest, and that's going to send the hips down. The problem is the swimmer has to recover the arms over the surface, and if the hips are low, the hands are going to be low, and it's going to be really difficult to get them out of the water. So if we watch here, we're going to see the swimmer kick, and their hips are going to rise up in the water. So you can see those few frames here. Some of it's the pull, but it's also the kick. So the hips are low, and the kick's starting to go now, and up go the hips. They're back up at the surface, and then the swimmer can recover the arms effectively and smoothly. Without that kick, it's going to be a lot more difficult to keep the hips up at the surface. When the head and chest are lifted, that's necessarily going to push them down. And then that kick can counteract that and get the hips up at the surface, which makes it a lot easier to recover the arms, a lot easier to swim effective butterfly. So creating propulsion with the lower body is critically important because it moves swimmers down the pool, and it allows them to more effectively perform the arm recovery and then get back into alignment after the arm recovery. So the kick is a lot more than just an added speed bonus. It's an integral part of how the stroke works, and without it, or without an effective kick, it's going to be a lot harder to swim effective butterfly. One aspect of the kick that I want to draw attention to is the leg recovery. So a lot of swimmers tend to think that it's just a knee action, when in reality, it's a knee and hip action through the kick itself, but the leg recovery is going to happen almost exclusively from the hips. So if we watch here, the legs are going to be recovered straight up, and the only reason they bend is because the foot's still moving up when the knee comes back down to set up the kick. So the leg recovery here is straight, and then as he starts to kick here, that's what's bending the knee, is pulling the knee forward while the foot is still rising, rather than lifting the foot up to the butt. And that's going to create the position to have an effective kick. So if we watch it again here, a straight leg recovery and then a reversal of the knee, the swimmer's not recovering the foot from the knee, it's happening from the hip. And then only when the kick happens itself, that's when there's a reversal and that's when the knee bends. Swimmers have to learn how to move from the hip and the knee when they kick and then move just from the hip when they recover. If they're just going to bend the knee and move the foot back and forth, it's going to be a lot less effective and they're going to get a lot less propulsion. So let's take a look at these same skills with another swimmer just to demonstrate that it's not that one swimmer. So again, you can see those feet are pointed backwards and then only at the end do they flick down towards the bottom of the pool. So they're facing backwards as much as possible. One, because she's bending the knees, and two, she's got the feet bent backwards as well. And then that flick is what finishes the kick. And if we watch here, you can see the legs recover straight there. And it's only when she pulls the knee back forward is when they bend. So she's already starting her downward kick, and that's what causes the knees to bend, not the recovery itself. The recovery is straight, and then the knees come forward to kick, which is what actually bends the knee, not the recovery itself. So one more time. The legs are straight, and then she starts to kick, and that's what bends the knee. Now, in terms of propulsion, you can see that kick right there as the arms recover, and that's going to allow her to maintain speed a little bit more when she doesn't have any propulsion from the upper body. And then after the pull, there's the kick there, which again accelerates her so she can make it through the arm recovery. So that's how the kick is creating forward motion, forward propulsion, and it happens at the times when it's most necessary and most effective. Now, in terms of the vertical aspect of the kick, we're going to watch right here. The kick gets those hips up to the surface so she can recover the arms. And then upon entry, you can see that the kick there, right there, pops those hips up to the surface. So now that she's in really good alignment and ready to start the next stroke. And then boom, kick there. You can see that lifts the hips up to the surface, and that's going to allow her to recover the arms a lot more effectively. So the kick isn't just this added thing that helps swimmers move through the water a little bit faster. It happens at key moments to create propulsion when there's no propulsion in the front of the stroke and to create an even bigger burst of propulsion prior to the arm recoveries at the end of the stroke. And in terms of the vertical position, it helps get the hips up after the arm entry, and it helps get the hips up prior to the arm recovery. In both cases, the stroke's going to be much more difficult to execute if those actions aren't happening. And so that's why the kick is so important, because it not only adds a little bit more forward propulsion, but it happens at the right times and in the right ways to help hold the stroke together and get through the challenging aspects of the stroke. And in terms of creating a lot of propulsion, it's about orienting the feet backwards as much as possible, and then kicking backwards and down as much as possible, and then recovering the legs straight so that the swimmer can whip those feet back down to create a lot of propulsion. And that's ultimately the value of the straight leg recovery right here, is that it allows for a whipping action that starts at the hips, goes through the knees, and then snaps down through the ankles to create even more propulsion, both forward and up. If butterflyers can't manage their position and their alignment in the water, all the propulsion in the world isn't going to help them swim fast. We're going to explore the skill of horizontal alignment in butterfly and how achieving horizontal alignment is critical for reducing the amount of resistance swimmers create, and thus it directly relates to how much speed they can create. So as much as possible, swimmers want to move through the water as straight as they can in butterfly. However, they can't necessarily do so because they have to recover both arms over the water at the same time. In order to do that, they're going to have to lift their chest, which is going to sink their hips. So the key to maintaining great horizontal alignment, so the key to reducing the amount of resistance swimmers create as they move through the water, is to find a way to minimize the loss of horizontal alignment when they lift the head and the chest to recover the arms and to breathe. And then after the arm recovery and then after the breath, getting everything back into line as effectively and as quickly as possible to reestablish great alignment. So swimmers have to minimize the disruption of alignment when they recover the arms and breathe. They need to get back in alignment after they recover the arms and breathe. And finally, they need to minimize the time that they're out of alignment. And the better they can do all three of those skills, the less resistance they'll create and the faster they'll swim. So let's dive in and check out what it looks like. So if we watch this swimmer here, we're going to start from the beginning of her stroke. And as you can see, she's relatively aligned and that the hips are up at the surface. The chest is pressed down a little bit and she's relatively level. So as she starts this stroke cycle, she's going to start to move out of alignment in order to prepare for recovery of the arms. So she's going to come up, lift the chest, lift the shoulders. She's going to breathe on this stroke. And this is going to create a position where her arms are free to recover over the surface. But in order to do that, her body's going to have to be at a little bit of an incline. And you can see that position here. And then as she recovers the arm, she's going to stay in that position And then once the arms come back in, she's going to quickly get out of that position. So you can see she went from this inclined position to a pretty horizontal position pretty quickly. So that's the key skill of getting out of it, which is really important for swimmers to do after each and every stroke cycle. And so how she's going to do that, it's going to be three key things. One, the chest is going to be coming down out of the water, and that's going to create a little bit of a sinking moment so that the chest begins to drop down in the water. Secondly, you can watch the hands here. They're going to hit at about the same time. They're going to have momentum. They can drive the body down a little bit flatter as well. And then the third piece, if we watch the legs here, she's going to kick as everything enters, and you can watch the hips here pop right up to the surface at the end of the kick. So the kick pops down right there is when it finishes, up the hips go to the surface. So by entering relatively forward and aggressively, by letting the weight of the chest drop the chest into the water, and then by kicking aggressively, that can get everything back up into alignment, and it can get everything back into alignment really quickly. So we talked about a little bit earlier, it's not just the positions, it's about getting out of those positions really fast, which is important. So if we go back, you can see here, the alignment's not great, not because she's necessarily making technical errors, but because that's the reality of taking a breath and lifting the arms out of the water. That's the position swimmers are going to be in. And then she's going to get out of that, though, really, really quickly. And that's going to be really effective for minimizing the amount of resistance that she creates. So when it comes to lifting the chest and head out of the water, swimmers want to do as much as necessary, but as little as possible. So they need to get a clean breath. They need to get clean arm recoveries. And the more they can do that without lifting excessively, the least resistance they're going to be able to create without compromising the breath, without compromising the arm recovery. And so through this position, she's trying to maintain as much horizontal alignment as she can, even though she's going to necessarily have to disrupt it to get the arms over the water. So the better she can be, the better any athlete can be during this position and not lifting straight up, but lifting enough, that's going to be really important for minimizing the amount of resistance they create. And then regardless, they need to get out of that position as quickly as they can and as fast as they can and as significantly as they can. The better they can do with that, the least resistance they're going to create, and that ultimately means more speed. So the previous swimmer was swimming a 200-meter race. This swimmer is swimming a 50-meter race, and so there's going to be a little bit less total undulation. The stroke rate's going to be a little bit faster, but we're going to see the principles are the same. When she's set up in the front of the stroke, she's level in the water. And then she's going to lift up. It's not as high because she's not breathing, but she still has to lift up. And you can see the body's going to be at an inclined position right there especially. And then as she comes over the top, the hands enter, the chest presses, and the hips come up. And if we watch the kick, boom, the hips come up to the surface as a result of the kick. So when that entry happens, the chest press happens, and the kick happens all at the same time. Swimmers can go from this position right into that position and do so really quickly. And that's the key timing point that they need to consider, is getting everything to happen at the same time right there to pop back into alignment quickly and easily, not taking a lot of energy and not taking a lot of time. So they get into really great positions without wasting energy. So again, with the loss of alignment, she's going to be doing a really good job of staying low here. But even then, there's going to be an incline of the body. It's trying to minimize it as much as possible and then getting out of that position as quickly as possible by recovering the arms and then popping the hips up to the surface, tying everything together. So while it's not necessarily easy to do, horizontal alignment in butterfly is all about minimizing how much resistance is created when swimmers take the breath and when they recover their arms. And then after that, they need to minimize the impact of those movements by getting out of them and getting out of them fast. So if we watch here, swimmer's not in a great position because of the arm recoveries, but really quickly, they get back into position, and this is, again, at a 50-meter race, so the stroke rates are high. She's swimming really fast, but regardless of that, she's able to get back into a horizontally aligned position each and every stroke, and that's going to be able to create a lot more speed, whereas if she just started kind of going through the water like that, she's going to be creating more and more resistance, and that's really going to slow her down, and it's going to create a ton of fatigue as well. So again, horizontal alignment in butterfly, pretty simple. Minimize the rise of the chest, the shoulders, and the head so that swimmers are able to smoothly and easily recover the arms and get a good breath, but no more. And then after that, they need to get out of those positions fast, and they need to get out of those positions significantly enough so that they get back into alignment like we see this swimmer here. And that's true whether they're swimming 50s, 100s, or 200s. They've got to get back to that aligned position with each stroke cycle so that they can minimize the amount of resistance they create while maximizing the amount of speed they create. Undulation is a defining characteristic of butterfly, and if swimmers don't get it right, they're never going to be able to swim as fast as they otherwise could. The challenge with undulation is that it's not necessarily about doing more or doing less, it's about finding the optimum amount of undulation, and that optimum amount can differ from individual to individual. To help you better understand how to find the optimal amount of undulation for each of your swimmers, we're going to go through what undulation is, why it happens, and some of the considerations for finding an optimal amount of undulation. Let's dive into undulation in butterfly, and as always, I'll keep it simple so that you can understand the key concepts that you need to help your swimmers learn. Before we get into the video, let's take a minute to consider why undulation even happens in the first place. Butterfly creates a unique challenge in that both arms need to be recovered over the surface of the water at the same time. In freestyle and backstroke, swimmers can rotate to get one arm up over the water, but that option isn't available in butterfly because if you rotate on one side, that's just going to send the other arm even deeper. So the solution is lift the shoulders, lift the chest, and then recover the arms over the water, having lifted the upper body out of the water. And that is essentially the primary purpose of undulation. Swimmers have to find a way to recover the arms with as little effort as possible, and the easiest way to do that is to lift the chest, lift the head up out of the water. But of course, what goes up has to come back down. Now we have that wave that starts to happen as a result of the chest, the head, and the shoulders lifting out of the water and then coming back down. And of course, what happens with the head and the chest is necessarily going to affect what happens with the hips. So when the upper body goes up, the hips go down, and then that reverses. When the upper body comes back down, the hips come back up. So now we have a wave of undulation traveling through the body. So whenever it gets confusing as to what's happening, remember that undulation has to happen so that the arms can be recovered over the water. There's some other things going on. There's some timing stuff going on, and we're going to go over that in more detail. But just remember, the undulation happens so that the arms can be recovered over the water. If that undulation doesn't happen effectively, swimmers are going to be in big trouble. But as I referenced earlier, it's not just about more, it's about an optimal amount of undulation. And the more effective swimmers are at finding the optimal amount of undulation, they'll be able to reduce the amount of resistance they create as they move through the water, and they'll also be able to increase how much propulsion they create. So let's check it out. So let's start with our swimmer at the beginning of the stroke cycle, and they are relatively flat in the water. So what's going to happen here is in order to prepare to recover the arms, she has to make sure she's in position by the time that the arms finish the pull. So as we see here, she's going to start to lift everything up, start that wave of undulation as she begins the pull, so that by the time the hands are at the end of the stroke, they finish the pull, she's already got the shoulders up and out of the water. So by the time the arms have finished the pull, she's got her chest and shoulders up out of the water so that the arms can be smoothly recovered over the surface. The shoulders were still low in the water when she finished that pull. She'll be in a whole lot of trouble in terms of trying to get those arms over the surface of the water. So again, that wave of undulation starts right when the pull begins so that she can execute that arm recovery right when the arm pull is finished. She's got to be in that elevated position in order to get the arms over the water. So as we move through that front of the stroke, let's pay attention to what happens at the hips now. So as the shoulders are coming up, the hips are going to be dropping down, and so they're going to end up in this position. But then at the end of the pull, once the shoulders are up as high as they need to be, the swimmer is going to kick, and that's going to send the hips back up. That's going to get the swimmer a little bit more level in the water. And then when the arms recover, everything in the front is going to come back down and then go over the top with that undulation. And then a second kick, as the hands come over right there, is going to get those hips up even higher. So the kick in the second half of the stroke is helping to reverse the wave of undulation, send the swimmer back over the top. So again, the swimmer starts to rise. That's going to send the hips down. The kick there sends the hips back up. And then after the arms recover, another kick is going to send the hips even higher up and get the chest pressed down in the water. So the swimmer goes up for the pull, and then they come back down. So the kick is going to stop the rise of the upper body, and then it's going to help swimmers get back over that wave by kicking again to get the hips up in the front of the stroke. Then the shoulders are going to be down a little bit, and then we can start again. So the body is going to go up through the pull to set up for the arm recovery, and then the kick is going to help facilitate a return to a neutral position within each stroke cycle. And if the kick wasn't performing that key function, what could potentially happen is that the swimmer keeps elevating in the water, and that's going to create more resistance. It's going to move them out of alignment. It's going to be too much undulation. And so that kick can help to stop the wave of undulation, keep the hips from sinking even lower. So the kick is really important for preventing too much undulation after the pull and before the arm recovery. And the kick is also really important, getting everything back in alignment so that they can set up the next stroke cycle. So to recap what we've discussed so far, the upper body needs to rise in the water in order to get the arms out of the water and recover them smoothly and effortlessly. And the kick is helping to control that undulation, preventing it from being too excessive when the upper body lifts and driving the hips down to the bottom of the pool, which is going to create a ton of resistance. And the kick gets the hips back up into alignment, completing that wave of undulation, getting the hips a little bit higher than the chest, and that returns the swimmer to the starting point. Then they can raise the chest again, drop the hips, and so on. So the kick plays a key role in controlling the amount of undulation. Undulation can also be effective at helping swimmers get more out of their pull. So if we watch here, as she pulls, she's going to arch the back and lift the upper body. While that will certainly help her get in a position to recover the arms, it also puts the arms in a more effective position to create propulsion. So just like if you try to do a pull-up, most people will arch their back in order to create more force. The same thing can happen here during the pull. So by arching and lifting during the pull, it can create more propulsion than it otherwise would. Just put your hands in position here and just arch a little bit without pulling, and you'll feel that little contraction. You'll feel that extra power that you can create by using that movement. And the same thing happens in butterfly. So by timing the arm pull and raising of the body, swimmers can create more propulsion than they otherwise could if they just stayed level in the water. They're able to get more torque, they're able to create more force, and that means more propulsion, more power through the stroke. So not only is undulation important for recovering the arms, it can also help swimmers get more out of the pull itself. While this is more of a secondary consequence relative to the importance of recovering the arms, it can add a little bit more speed, help swimmers get a little bit more propulsion than they otherwise could. So we'll take a look at the same dynamics with one more swimmer. You can see here, she's in line. And to start the pull, she's going to begin to lift the upper body so that the shoulders are up out of the water as the arms finish the pull. And then she's going to recover them back in. And then the head, the chest, everything is going to come back down. So again, the upper body is raised during the pull to help get the arms in position to recover smoothly over the surface of the water. And then everything comes back into line. Now, if we pay attention to the kick here, it's going to happen here to prevent the hips from dropping even further. And then in the front of the stroke, it's going to happen to get everything back in line to finish that wave of undulation. And so the kick is really effective and really important for ensuring that, one, the undulation is controlled during the pull, and then two, that the wave of undulation completes so that everything can get back in line and the swimmer can maintain great alignment, minimize resistance as they move through the water. We'll watch the pull here. Again, lifting the upper body puts her in a really strong position to create a lot of propulsion through that pull. And the more propulsion she can create, the faster she's going to swim. So the key idea when it comes to helping swimmers go fast is that they do need to undulate in order to get the arms recovered over the surface with as little effort and as little energy and as much speed as possible. If they don't lift high enough, they're going to really struggle to get the arms fluidly over the surface. And if they lift too high, those hips are going to drop too low. It's not going to help them recover anymore, but it's going to come at a significant cost. There's going to be more resistance, and it's going to take too much time. So they need to undulate just enough to recover the arms smoothly and no more. And they can effectively manage the undulation by using the kick to keep the hips up right after the pull and also get the hips back up into position after the arms are recovered. Doing so is going to minimize the amount of resistance that swimmers create, and that means more speed. Fast butterfly is all about effective timing. The good news is butterfly timing is actually really simple. The bad news is that it's not always particularly easy to learn, and if swimmers struggle with it, it's going to be really difficult to swim fast. We're going to take a look at timing in butterfly. We'll take a look at the key events so that you can see what your swimmers need to do to swim fast. And as always, we'll keep it simple, so let's dive in. The most critical aspect of butterfly timing is the arm to leg timing. So when do the kicks happen relative to what the arms are doing? So if we watch here, the kicks are going to take place at two key times. The first is when the hands enter the water. So right there is that kick. And then the second kick is when the hands exit the water. So it's really, really simple. The legs kick when the hands enter and the legs kick when the hands exit. So why does that happen? We'll take a look from the start of the stroke. So as you can see here, the swimmer is at an angle as they move through the water, and that's going to create more resistance as they move through the water. So they need to get out of that position to start the stroke. So when the hands come in, boom, the kick is going to go right there. And if you watch, that's going to send the hips up towards the surface of the water, and that's going to get him more level in the water. And so that's one of the key aspects of the kick. Not only is it moving the swimmer forwards, it's moving the hips up. And if swimmers execute that kick at the right time, they can change the position of the hips to create more speed. And a key point in the stroke cycle is right there to reestablish great alignment in the water. So when the hands are entering the water, the chest and the shoulders are entering back into the water, and then we get that little leg kick, boom, all of a sudden the hips are back in alignment. And now swimmers are going to create a lot less resistance, and they're not going to go vertical, which is what we can see when swimmers don't execute that great kick. Now, the second kick, it's going to happen when the hands exit the water. Why is that the case? Well, the upper body is going to rise so that the shoulders can be free of the water, so that the arms can recover over the water. The problem with that is when the head and the chest go up, the hips are going to go down. And that's going to create a problem because it's going to be much more difficult to recover the arms over the surface of the water. We can solve that problem by kicking, which right there, you can see lifts the hips in the water. Now the hands are at the surface of the water. Now they can be recovered nice and easy. So that's one of the key aspects of the kick is if swimmers don't have a strong second kick or an effective second kick, it's going to be much harder to get the hips up in the water. It's going to be much harder to recover the arms over the surface. That kick also has another benefit in that it creates forward propulsion. At the same time, the arms are creating a lot of propulsion, and so you get a big surge right there. And why that's valuable, guess what's happening right now? A whole lot of nothing in terms of creating propulsion, and that's while the arms are recovering, while the body's not in a great position, so that's going to really slow swimmers down. And so if they have this big pulse of speed here, that can carry them through until the arms get back into the water, and they can create more propulsion. Now we're back to the front of the stroke, and we got to get those hips back into alignment, and there's that second kick. So the kick timing is absolutely critical for fast butterfly swimming because in each case, it gets the hips back up to the surface of the water when they need to be. One time that's in the front of the stroke so that the swimmer can be horizontal, and then the other time's in the back of the stroke so that the hips can be up at the surface so that the swimmers can recover the arms over the surface. We'll show those same dynamics here with another swimmer. So right here, boom, there's that kick, gets the hips up towards the surface, and then at the front of the stroke, boom, there's that kick, gets the hips back up to the surface. And we'll watch it one more time. There, hips are up at the surface. Boom, hips are up at the surface. And so again, that kick timing is really critical to help recover the arms and reestablish horizontal alignment in the front of the stroke. So really simple, not always easy to do, but really, really important for creating speed. Next aspect of timing that we're going to discuss is breath timing. And like kick timing, breath timing is pretty simple and it's even more intuitive. So what's going to happen is that in order to breathe effectively, swimmers want to time their breath with the rising of the body and the falling of the body. So they're going to start their breathing action as the upper body starts to rise. And you can see his head lifts up there. He's getting ready to breathe. And then he comes up to get that breath. And he can do that when the shoulders are coming up out of the water. So he's lifting his head as the shoulders are coming up out of the water. And then you get that head back down before the shoulders start to come back down, so it's already in place once everything comes back into the water. So breath timing is ultimately simple. He's going to breathe with the rhythm of the body, and then he's going to get his head back down with the rhythm of the body as well. And the more effectively swimmers can do that, they can breathe without disrupting that basic undulation rhythm. So they're just going to tie the breath to that rhythm. The challenges come when the breathing happens late after the body has already risen, or when they start to lift the head well before the body starts to rise. Usually you see late breathing rather than really, really early breathing. And the same thing can happen on returning the breath. The head gets stuck up even though the body's coming back down, when what we really want is the head to be with or ahead of the body, getting back down into alignment as fast as possible. We'll watch the same thing with our other swimmer here. You can see she rises up to breathe as the body is rising up to breathe, and then she's getting things back down before the shoulders come back down into the water. So she's beating the shoulders, she's getting everything back down prior to the arms and the shoulders returning to the water. Again, rising up with the rhythm of the body, and then coming back down with the rhythm of the body. Up with the rhythm of the body, down with the rhythm of the body. It's going to be a lot more effective to stay with the body because that's going to give them the range of motion they need to actually get their head out of the water. And they want to make sure that they get the head back down with the body so that there's no delay in executing or initiating the next stroke cycle. Last skill we're going to talk about is how swimmers can use undulation to make their pull more effective. So if you notice here, he's going to rise up as he begins to execute his pull, and that's going to create a much more powerful pull than if he tried to stay really level. So as he sets up the pull, once it's set up and he starts to pull, that's when he starts to rise. If you've ever done a pull-up or you've seen someone do a pull-up, what most people do is they arch their back when they pull, and that's exactly what he's doing here. As he begins to pull, he arches his back and then uses that motion to create even more propulsion, more force. And so you can just do that yourself here. If you think about arching there, you're going to feel a stronger contraction, a little bit more powerful contraction. And so rather than being late on the pull or being early on the pull, by pulling with the rising body, swimmers are going to be able to create a lot more propulsion than they would if they just tried to stay really level in the water. So a powerful pull is made even more powerful by initiating the pull when the swimmer's rising up, whether they're breathing or even when they're not breathing, there's still going to be a rise with the upper body right there, and that's going to create more propulsion than if the swimmer tried to stay extremely level throughout the stroke cycle. We can watch the same thing with this swimmer. So as she begins to rise up, that's where the pull happens. And then again, as she begins to rise up, that's when the pull happens. It allows swimmers to get more leverage on the water, create more propulsion, and ultimately create more speed. And so it's a timing event too. It's just like the others. It's got to be precise. It's got to be accurate. It's not particularly complicated, but it really makes a big difference in terms of how much propulsion and speed that swimmers create. So going fast in butterfly is simple, although not easy. The leg kick needs to happen when the hands enter the water. When they exit the water, the breath needs to happen with the rise and fall of the body, and the pull is even more effective when it happens with the rise of the body as well. If you want to learn more about the undulation of the body and really fast butterflyers, check out the video below.